Better. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for attending the session on findings in financial literacy. Plenty of seats up front. I thought I'd start us off with some fun facts. I don't know if many of you know that there are more plastic flamingos in the United States of America than there are real ones. Goats have rectangular pupils, and mosquitoes have 47 teeth. I don't know who knew that fun fact. And something else that I just recently learned was the average cost of Thanksgiving dinner for 10 was $49.12. It's the lowest it's been in 5 years. That's according to the American Farm Bureau Federation. So with all of those fun facts, kind of my point was probably the one that most of you would remember or probably might even debate. Less than 2% of those informally surveyed didn't believe that Thanksgiving dinner could be less than $50, but the number is $49.12. But that happens to be a point of information that's relevant, probably because most of you had Thanksgiving dinner, and timely because Thanksgiving was just a couple of days ago. So those are just two of effective financial education principles that happen to be in the presentation at the very back. So we're going to point to that as we move along. But hopefully those are two things that you remember when you leave today. But we have plenty of fun facts and information that we hope will help you to do your job. So that's us. That's me up at the top, Elizabeth Coogan. And I'm part of the customer experience group at Federal Student Aid. And our customers are our students, but we know that we can't do it alone and we need your help. And we appreciate you being here. And I have two wonderful co-presenters that have quite a bit of information that will be helpful to you in doing your jobs. So what's my job at Federal Student Aid? Rather than go through all the details of my day-to-day responsibilities, I'd like to let you know that I feel very strongly and passionate about keeping the spotlight on financial literacy. So here's pretty much how the day is going to go. Each of us are going to try and stick to this outline. We're going to cover some survey information, talk about some resources, talk about collaboration, some examples of collaboration. And the research part is pretty much, if you've seen the presentation already, there's quite a bit of research information in the back. We won't be going through that appendix. We'll be referencing some things that you can find more about by looking at the back of the research. I'd also like to point out specifically there are some things back there that might be of interest. For instance, emergency aid. I know we talk about people having a lack of understanding in managing their money, but there are many people out there that just don't have enough money. Many people out there that don't even have enough money to feed themselves to stay awake during class. So that's some really interesting information. There's great information on peer counseling. And there's also information on financial aid office strategies and assessments, which can help you tremendously. So the first section is surveys. Customer experience does conduct borrower surveys. So I picked 3 slides that I thought were rather telling, not just in how the borrowers answered, but the things that probably can infer from that. And the first one was about asking students if they knew enough before they took out their loans. And I think probably all of us share that whole sentiment, is that we wish students knew more, and then they don't really know what they should know. We're going to hear some good news from Andrea about students getting help in advance of attending post-secondary institutions and some of the resources that are out there. The next slide, we asked borrowers if they borrowed more than they had expected originally. And as you can see, a high percentage, especially those in default and delinquency, wish that they had not borrowed as much as they had. The next slide is if you could make a change. And this slide, I think, demonstrates a sort of saying that I often use with my coworkers, and probably you can agree with me, is that we need to figure out ways in which we can help students minimize their regrets. The next thing that I wanted to talk about on the survey front is from the Department of Education. How many of you are familiar with the NPSAS survey? Okay, I hope more of you are, especially after today. Well, it's the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Survey, and it examines how students are borrowing. It conducts student interviews, it uses institutional record information. And so the point that I'm making by including the NIPSAS survey in this presentation is that the NIPSAS survey in the 2015-16 survey added financial literacy questions. So these are some of the topics that there are 5 questions that the questions are addressing. So the point being is the data from the NIPSAS survey is often used. Actually, that survey existed before the Department of Education. The data for education in general is very important and important for policy making. And so we find it very encouraging that this survey now includes financial literacy questions, and we hope that that will be used to influence policy. So the next section that I'm going to cover is resources, some new, some old favorites. The first one that I just wanted to point out was the financial aid toolkit, and it's mostly for those people such as yourselves who are helping students. It has a searchable database, and hopefully if you don't know about it, you'll go back and check it out. And also there's a search feature, and you will search the term financial literacy. You'll come up with a number of resources. One specifically will address the different phases of the student aid life cycle and the resources that are available to help students with financial decision-making within each of those phases. Another old favorite of mine is the Financial Awareness Counseling Tool, also known as FACT. Hopefully I'll get more hands than I did on the NIPSAS survey, those of you that are already using it. Oh, okay. So this is a tool that's been around since 2012. It's now mobile ready, but it's something that you can use anytime with students. We have an experiment that's starting for loan counseling, and some schools will be using the Financial Awareness Counseling Tool. Students will be required to do that before receiving additional funds, so it'll be really interesting to see the results of that experiment. This is fairly new. This is a money management checklist, and there is for students in school, and there are 10 things that we tell students that they should keep an eye on in their financial lives. It starts with obviously applying for financial aid, but the number 2 on the list is know about the loans that you owe. And there are other money management tips, the 10th one being keep good records. It's amazing in the Ombudsman's office the number of claims we have from students that these transactions occurred, but they have no proof of especially paying off their loan, which is terribly disheartening. So another resource that I wanted to point out was the financial literacy guidance. And that narrows the financial concepts that we at Federal Student Aid think those people that are coming to our office should be aware of, or we should help them to know more about it. And those 3 concepts are budgeting, borrowing, and repayment. The last year's session, I think we spoke quite a bit about those 3 terms and ways in which you convey that information to students. So this is an 8-page document, and each one of those concepts is referenced in various forms of collateral that the department offers. We have a 2-minute video on the benefits of budgeting. And there are a couple of other videos that explain repayment and repayment options and borrowing, responsible borrowing, and so forth. So we feel that this is a great resource for the financial aid office, but we feel that it's an even better resource for offices at your school who may be helping students with their financial lives, and most of those students, about 70% of students that are attending post-secondary have borrowed. So we hope that you will share this with other offices who may be reaching out to help students manage their money. So that sort of leads to the discussion of collaboration. So we'd like to think the financial literacy guidance might be something if you're collaborating with another office at your school who's helping students with their finances, and that would clearly demonstrate some of the resources that relate to federal student loans. Another example of collaboration is the work that we do. The Department of Education is a member of the Financial Literacy and Education Commission that's guided by the U.S. Treasury Department. This is a publication that can be found on Treasury's website. So they help us to do our job. We collaborate with other federal agencies, and the FLEC Commission tries to create relationships between agencies, as well as help service those that the agencies are reaching out to as it relates to their financial lives. So this report, Opportunities to Improve the Financial Capability and Well-Being of Post-Secondary Students, contains a myriad of information as it relates to what other schools, or what schools are doing. There's about 30 some odd schools, and it shows, it gives a synopsis of what they're doing with their students for financial capability or financial literacy. It also shows third-party services. So it gives a menu of different services, free or some not free, and the types of resources that they provide. I highly recommend that you take a look at that. An example of collaboration through the FLEC is the department, FSA is working with HUD and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and one of their goals is to increase the educational attainment of their housing benefit recipients. So we're working with them and trying to help their public housing ages 18 to 24 realize the benefits of FAFSA and to help them fill out the FAFSA application. Another example of collaboration, some of you may have heard of this organization, the Higher Education Financial Wellness Organization. There's the link there. It's a group of really it just came together. There's by two individuals in the financial aid or in the student service world. It consists of practitioners, policymakers, and researchers who are all about financial wellness. The last conference, there were about 200 plus institutions who were represented, and about 50% of the attendees were financial aid. So I think what that tells us, though, is that financial aid people really care about this, but there's a lot of other people at your institutions who are trying to make an impact on students and their financial, whether you call it capability or literacy or wellness. So I think that does speak to the point of collaborating with offices at your school, and this is an organization that tremendously exemplifies the power of collaboration. They have a conference annually, it's in July, and they also have a listserv and podcasts and free resources that you might want to take a look at. The last thing that I wanted to show a photo of some FSA folks, and we actually do have what we call FSA Day, and there are about 1,200 people in the department, and we all have different types of responsibilities, where it's program compliance or risk assessment, policy, but all of us are about student success. And so when we have this day and we talk to one another and share what we're doing, it really tends to create some great benefits to collaborating, understanding the work of others, and figuring out ways to help each other. So both of my co-presenters are going to have some great examples of collaboration, as well as some other information that hopefully you'll find useful and go home today feeling energized, wanting to collaborate and do more for your students at your school. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the opportunity to speak here at this conference. So I'm Andrea Hasler. I'm Assistant Research Professor in Financial Literacy. I am currently leading the research team at GFLEC. So what's GFLEC? GFLEC is a Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center. And we were founded in 2011 at the George Washington University School of Business by Professor Anna Maria Lusardi. And we are located in Washington, D.C. So what do we do? So GFLEC conducts research on financial literacy globally. And with that research, that expertise, we seek to inform policy as well as develop and promote financial literacy education programs and initiatives. And our education programs are actually in school, as well as in the workplace and in the community. And this is an overview of our education programs and initiatives. So based on the research, we developed these initiatives. And the first four, I will talk about them a little bit later. There are our programs in schools. The second to last is the International Federation of Finance Museum. This is a collaboration among various countries to build museums around personal finances with the goal to elevate financial literacy in the society. And then we also work together with companies on their specific workplace financial wellness programs. So this is basically what we are doing at GFLEC. We are a research center affiliated to the University in Washington. So first, what I'd like to talk about is how do we define financial literacy, and how do we measure it? So our definition of financial literacy includes not only the knowledge and understanding of financial concepts and risk, it also includes the skills, the motivation, and the confidence to actually apply such knowledge and understanding in daily life in order to make them sound and effective decisions. So there are both components, so the knowledge as well as also the skills, motivation, and confidence. But now the question is, how do we measure financial literacy? And basically everything started with those three questions. They're very simple questions, questions that capture basic financial concepts. The first concept here, question 1, is about the concept of interest rate. So people were asked, you have $100 in a saving account, the interest rate was 2% per year. Will you have, after the 5 years, will you have more than 102, exactly 102, or less than 102? The correct answer is more than 102. It's not, here it's not that we test how much they can calculate or how good they're in math. It's more that they understand the concept. The second question is about inflation. So we see here if the inflation rate is higher than the interest rate, then you can buy, of course, less after 1 year. That's the second question. And the third question is on the risk diversification. So it tests the awareness of risk and whether people know that single stocks are riskier than stock mutual funds, which are portfolios of individual stocks. So everything actually starts with those three big questions, which were also included in the NIPSAS data, as Elizabeth explained and talked about earlier. So now I'd like to turn to our current research findings, and all the findings here, which I will present, are actually based on the NFCS. That's another survey, that's a National Financial Capability Study. I will present findings on the 2015 wave. The next wave, actually, that survey is conducted every 3 years. The next survey will be conducted in 2018. And during that survey, 27,000 people were actually asked those three questions. And this is a representative sample of the US household. And just to let you know, all my research findings and also the NFCS, everything is provided in the research appendix at the end of this presentation. So I will focus here in that presentation on the millennials. The millennials are a very important group to study because they already have and will have in the future an even larger impact on the economy. And what I'm looking at here are I classify millennials as 23 to 35-year-old individuals. And we see in our data set that it is a very diverse generation. So it is actually the most diverse generation compared to other cohorts. And minorities are broadly represented. Another feature is also millennials are highly educated. So 44% have at least a bachelor's degree. And as said before, they will have or already have a large economic impact. So very soon, by 2025, 3 out of 4 workers globally will be millennials. So now, how does financial literacy look across age? So we see that financial knowledge increases very slowly with age and cohort. And it increases, but if you look at the number, for example, so just to let you know, the blue bars stand for a different age bracket. And the number on top of each blue bar is the measure, or is the amount of people who answered the 3 questions I just discussed before correctly. So if you look at the age cohort of 55 to 59-year-olds, the people close to retirement, 37% could answer the big 3 questions correctly. If you look at the millennials, which is highlighted here in orange, So the people below the age of 40, 1 in 3, only 1 in 3, so only 27% could actually answer the big 3 questions correctly. Even though by the age of 40, most or a lot of important decisions are already made. Decisions regarding student loans, family, building a family, buying a home, and also the career. So this is really kind of worrisome, and leads us here to the next slide of financial literacy among millennials. So we are also looking here only at the yellow part of our distribution, and I broke it down into the financial literacy questions. So in the NFCS, we added to the first 3 questions, so the first three bars are numeracy, inflation, risk diversification are the 3 questions I already spoke about, the big 3, and then we added 2 more, but I won't focus on them right now. But just let's look at the big 3, and in general, 23% answered the big 3 questions correctly. And there is a big divide between the questions that were answered correctly. So 72% of the millennials answered the the interest rate question correctly, whereas the risk diversification question was only answered by 38% correctly. Another interesting thing is here highlighted in orange are the do not knows. So we can also draw important information from the do not knows, because here we see with the risk diversification question, almost half of all millennials answered that they don't know the answer. And for our education programs, this is also important to know, because these people actually know and state that they do not know. This leads me to a very interesting observation, and which is actually the difference between the perceived and the actual financial knowledge. So we asked in that questionnaire, or in that survey that was asked, how would you assess your overall financial knowledge? And interesting to see here, 74% said that they're pretty confident that they know a lot. So the range was 1 very low to 7 very high, and 74% said, I know a lot, I'm confident about that. When we compare that to the actual financial knowledge, and I showed you the results before, only 23% could actually answer the first 3 questions correctly. And if you look at all 5 questions, we see that only 7% could answer the 5 questions correctly. So there's a big difference between perceived and actual financial knowledge, and that shows us some overconfidence among millennials, which is also important for us to know when we design personal finance education material. Then on another aspect, besides financial knowledge, we also look at financial well-being. And here we see among millennials that 36% are financially fragile, meaning they could certainly not come up, or probably not come up, with $2,000 within the next month. So the question was, are you confident? How confident are you that you could come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose within the next month? And we didn't restrict the answer or the resources, the coping method, to anything. So it could be selling things, savings, going to the pawn shop, going to friends, borrowing from family. So everything was included, and 36% said that they could not, or probably could not, come up with the $2,000. This is from the asset side. Now looking at the debt side, we see that 51% of all millennials feel that they have too much debt right now. And we also see that only 1 in 5 are satisfied with their financial condition. So the question is, what kind of debt causes this perception of having too much debt? And we clearly see that the largest share of the debt burden for millennials are student loans. And among all millennials, so the people from 23 to 35-year-old, they 50%, so half of all millennials, have a student loan. And if you now take the 50%, of these 50%, 48% are worried that they could not pay back that loan. So another 50% of the 50% are concerned about paying back their debt. And this leads us to another research Elizabeth also talked about, that among those 50% who already have a student loan, 57%, so the majority, would make another decision if they had the chance to do it all over again. So we see financial fragility, over-indebtedness, borrowing regrets are very prevalent and a big issue. And we use in our research, and we also see in our research that financial literacy is clearly linked to financial behavior, such as saving and high-cost borrowing. So that's why we believe that financial education is very important, and that's why I'd like to speak in my last section about our programs and initiatives at GFLEC and the George Washington University, so what we provide. What we see in our research is that there are different, we found components that are important or essential for effective financial education programs, and these are, for example, that programs are most effective when they're tailored to the audience, because everyone has specific needs and faces different personal financial decisions. So programs that are most effective, programs are most effective when they are addressed to these situations and provide the necessary information when needed by the individuals. So one size doesn't fit all. It has to be tailored, or is most effective when it is tailored to the audience. The second point is, what we find also in our research is that teachers see the need, but also are not that confident to teach personal finance course in schools, because they do not know what are good resources and where actually to begin. And I will speak about that in a minute. The last section, or the last principle or component we found is that one-time brief workshops on a Saturday afternoon are not that effective than mandatory and recurring courses built into the curriculum in schools. Speaking about our initiative, so what we do for teachers, we have micro-credentials for high school teachers here, but we also got submission from college professors, so it's not only for high schools. These micro-credentials actually provide resources and techniques how to teach personal finance in high schools. So our belief is that we should provide information and resources to students as early as possible, and for you as college, at the college, I think having a better financial knowledge at an early age would also help you with your work. But of course, personal finance courses should not only be in high schools, it should also continue to colleges. And what we also have here on our website, and the link is on the notes section in this presentation, and the presentation will be made available to you. So we have the personal finance course on college level, and we provide all information, so slides, presentation, exercises, tests, additional resources, everything is freely available on our website, and you can use it, or you can use it wherever you want in your classroom. One other very new initiative we have will come out next year, end of next year. It's actually an online toolkit, and it's called Financial Literacy Fast Lane Toolkit, and it's an online toolkit which will provide the resources and strategies needed for implementing a personal finance course in high schools. And it is actually addressed to any decision maker around financial education. So teachers, parents, principals, school district, and state officials. So it will provide a lot of resources and strategies to overcome the many barriers faced in the implementation of financial education. So if you're interested, look out for our new toolkit, which we are working on right now. Then, in my last two slides, I'd like to highlight a kind of different intervention besides classroom courses, and this is the collaboration we are doing at GW, the George Washington University, and it's called Financial Wellness Working Group. It is an initiative of the Colonial Central Registrar and Student Financial Services Office. So this is our one-stop shop for students. And the primary goal of this collaboration is actually to coordinate the efforts and resources across the various departments at GW and to set up a university-wide network with the objective to promote financial literacy and well-being of GW students. We had our first meeting, or we started actually this summer, and we talked about specific important topics we'd like to cover, and these are debt, budgeting, planning ahead, so the life after GW, after the college, but also benchmarking and data. So we'd like to gather information and data to measure the impact and the effectiveness of this initiative here. So my last slide now is I'd like to tell you how we did set up that working group. And so if you're interested in building a university-wide network at your school as well, so this may maybe help you in building that. So what we did, or basically what Colonial Central did, first they started with the evaluation of the current situation. So we looked into what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses of our school, of the organization. Then also, who are our students? What is important to them? And then, how much do they know about personal finances topics? That's where we came in and we did a survey. Then with all that information gathered, we looked into what's the institutional culture, what are the barriers, and how could we overcome those barriers. Based on these findings, we set then the working group, clear mission, vision, and SMART goals. And actually, our goal is our goal is twofold. So we'd like to build a network. We'd like to provide resources, creating content with the best impact for students. But we also like to build a network and create measurable outcomes. And with that thought, now I'd like to pass on the microphone to Suzanne, who will speak about the role of financial capability in student success, and actually her student financial well-being initiative at Iowa State University. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me to be part of the financial literacy session today. When I did a dry run of my presentation last night in my hotel room, it looked a lot different than it does right now, and it was a lot warmer, I gotta say, than it is right now. So I'm Suzanne Bartholomew, and I'm an assistant professor at Iowa State University. I'm also an extension state specialist. I'm in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. 60% of my job responsibilities is in extension and outreach. So I teach classes in personal finance, research on financial capability and wellness, but then also support community education around the topic. And Elizabeth was kind enough today to let me have the platform to maybe share a little bit about that extension and outreach piece of my position responsibilities. How many of you are familiar with cooperative extension? Show of hands. So there's a few of you, so good. There's some of you here that maybe will be enlightened about a resource in your community that you may not have tapped into before. So cooperative extension is a national system. It's a non-formal education system across the United States. And it takes knowledge and research from the university into the community through land-grant universities. How many of you are at land-grant or sea-grant universities that are here? Okay, so we have a couple of people. All right, so You can see on the map here, every state has a designated land-grant university, and you might have more than one in your state. And so a land-grant university has that three-pronged mission of research, teaching, and outreach and extension. But as an example, in Iowa, we have 1,000 faculty and staff that are spread out throughout Iowa. We have 99 counties, but we have 100 county extension offices. And housed within those offices are financial educators, but then we also have individuals who are working on community and economic development, parenting issues, child development. Most of you are probably familiar with the signature program of 4-H, youth development, and we have our roots in agriculture, so like our master gardener program. And so our federal agency is USDA. Has anybody ever partnered with cooperative extension? Because I have a lot of examples. Okay, good. Okay, so a couple of people. That's great. So I have 10 educators across the state, and they work with. I have a lot of examples where they work with colleges and institutions in their county areas. So I'll hit on cooperative extension again towards the end of the presentation. So we're going to think about financial capability or literacy, and those are two terms that are used interchangeably in our field, which does muddy the waters sometimes. But if we think about financial capability and how it relates to student success, a prototype would be a student who can control their day-to-day money management, who can absorb a financial shock, and who can stay on track to meet their financial goals. And their biggest financial goal right now is to get their degree, right? And then once they have their degree, we hope that they move on and they have stability. So that's what we mean by financial capability and college success. So there are a lot of people here in the room that are interested, obviously, in financial literacy, and you're interested in seeing your students thrive. So show of hands, how many of you think that financial literacy or capability is important to student success? Okay, so you are in line with a 2016 benchmark survey of student financial aid administrators. 75% of you said, yeah, I think that it's important. So it's good that we're all working from the same page. So before I start to talk about student success, I do want to talk a little bit about this model of financial action. And it is a model that was developed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it synthesizes all of the research around financial wellness, financial behavior, financial knowledge, and what we know and what we can understand about behavior. And then it also takes everything we know about what's effective financial education, and there's a creation of this model of financial action. So financial well-being is made up of three drivers: financial behaviors, financial knowledge, and personal traits. But we know that as our students are embedded in a social and economic environment, they're at your college or your university, have particular opportunities and supports that you may offer, and that their decisions are couched in a certain way. And so what this model tells us is that if we can make the student financial decision-making process, let's say around student loans, as easy as possible or as amenable as possible so that students can be motivated and take action and make the right choice, then they're going to have to rely a lot less on these three drivers of financial well-being. And that would be ideal, so that you're sort of on autopilot and things are helping you. Because as humans, when it comes to decision-making, if we're overwhelmed with too much information, or if we're faced with a really complex decision, we have a tendency to seize up and feel paralyzed, or we procrastinate and we don't make a decision. And so we don't want that to happen with our students. So just as a simple example, we know that 1 in 4 low-income students who are eligible for Pell Grants don't apply for those Pell Grants. And so there's something about the filling out a FAFSA form for them, right? That maybe it's too long, they don't know where to get the information, it's just not a fun task. So think about your campus or office and how you might make that task easier for them so that they make the right choice and they complete the FAFSA form, right? So you might pre-populate the form for them. You might have somebody on hand in your office that helps coach them through filling out the form. You might have a big poster that's hung around and all over campus that gives you the deadline of when the FAFSA form is due, and then what the benefits of filling out that form is. So as I move through this presentation, I really hope you think about the context that your student is embedded in and how you might be able to facilitate good decision-making for them. So before I talk about student success, I think we need to define what we mean by that. And there's a lot of different measures, and you probably each have your own definition of what you think a student looks like when they're successful. If you're from a 2-year college, you might measure success as being students who move on and transfer to a 4-year institution. But the real gold standard in terms of student success is getting a college degree, right? We want to see our students complete their program and complete their degree. So a lot of the research will look at college completion rates. We also look at how much time it takes to graduate, so that efficiency of getting a degree. So if you're at a 4-year institution, do you finish in 4 years? There's a whole body of research around student success that is couched as persistence, and persistence does refer to rolling and re-enrolling in school, but it also factors in institutional factors, so things like does a student feel valued by their institution? And then it also looks at personal factors and kind of matches up how the student feels about their ability to graduate, but then how is that matched between their personal factors and the institution. There are real traditional measures of student success, so academic performance like GPA, what are college entrance exam scores, what are the credit hours that they're meeting as they go from semester to semester that they're earning. We don't have enough resources to typically track students, but once they get out of school, thinking about where they are they employed, what kind of income level are they making? These are other measures of success. If you have a program that certifies a student, so let's say you're an accounting major and you have CPAs, that might be a measure that you would use for student success. And then in this room, we're interested in whether or not students have the ability to repay their student loans and whether they're going to default. There's clear evidence that financial challenges and emergencies are a major disruptor of student success. So the number one reason cited by students who have enrolled in a program and have dropped out is the expense of college. And there are a lot of correlates with student success. I named a few. So like there's personal factors, things like whether or not a student has academic or social self-esteem, whether or not their family is supportive of them going to school. A real important factor or correlate of student success is whether or not students are working. So if they're enrolled, students typically that are enrolled 30 hours or more per week have a greater probability of attrition or dropping out of school. And so, thinking about that context that I just talked about, in terms of working, like Temple University has a great example, and it's called Fly in 4 grant, and it's an incentive for students to work on campus 15 hours or less, and it's a grant for students who are eligible to really help them stay the course by reducing that really important factor that usually disrupts college. So I'm going to go through several slides here that is based on a data set that's administered out of Ohio State University. It was an online survey from 2017 with 65 institutions at 90 campuses. We invited 270,000 students to participate, and we had a response rate of around 10%. Some campuses we had a response rate of about 7%, and some as high as 20%. This is the second administration of this survey. It was formerly called the National Survey on Student Financial Wellness, but we've changed it to the Study on Collegiate Financial Wellness. I have a report from my institution from 2014 when it was administered the first time, and for 2017. So I have an institutional report on the financial wellness of the students at Iowa State. If you're interested in having one for your institution, I have cards at the front here. It's free, and we'll probably be having, it's free to participate, and we'll probably be having another administration in 2019. So one of the questions that we were interested in asking students was whether or not they had ever received financial education. And you can see most students have had, for the greatest proportion, are having one-time workshops or sessions when they get to campus, whether it's in high school or whether it's in college. We were also interested in their financial advising. So about 4 in 10 students have met with financial aid advisors across all institutions. Peer financial counseling is becoming more prevalent on campuses, and you can see that about 14% have met with the peer financial counselor, with the highest percentage being at community colleges. We ask students, in general, we ask, and the data is not showed here, but we just ask the question, are you confident in your ability to manage money? And about 8 in 10 students say, yeah, I feel pretty good about it. But then we looked at positive and negative financial behaviors and whether students were frequently engaged in those behaviors. And these numbers look pretty good. We see that students are tracking their spending, they're planning ahead for major purchases, they're monitoring their account balances. We have less than 5% that we surveyed were overdrawing on their bank account or impulse buying things or making late payments. So that's good news. When we think about the 3 drivers of financial wellness, the knowledge, the behavior, and the personal trait, financial self-efficacy, I think, would fall into that personal trait driver. And so what that refers to is a student's ability to activate their mental resources, their motivation, and to take action to make a financial decision. And we can see by these 5 indicators in financial self-efficacy that students are feeling pretty efficacious, that they feel like they're in control of their finances and they have the ability to make good decisions. So I think that is good news. Similar to Andrea's work, financial knowledge and financially knowledgeable students are more apt to be successful in terms of some of those outcomes that I talked about. There's been links in the research between financial knowledge and student success. We asked the big 3 questions on our survey, but then we also added 3 questions on credit reports, the cost of borrowing, and then take-home pay. And so the distribution here is this pie chart, and you can see that most students are in that 3 or 4 out of 6 questions correct, so getting about a D or an F on that. The one question that was on the cost of borrowing and repayment options, the good news there is that about 70% got that one item right. There aren't real big differences in terms of knowledge scores across institutions, but the highest level was with the 4-year public students. In terms of, so those are objective measures of financial knowledge, how did they do on 6 questions. But when we ask students about their financial decisions, this is similar to what Elizabeth found, is that students don't know whether or not there's a small percentage of students that don't know whether they've taken out a student loan. So you can see between 3 and 6% of students don't even know whether they've taken out a loan. And between 5 and 12% of students don't know the current amount of student loan debt that they have. And so, again, getting back to that model of financial action, what can we do for students who don't know whether they have a loan and don't know what their amount is? There's been some great work done around just sending debt letters, right? So it's a very low-cost, high-impact way to, again, bolster that context so that we can help students become more knowledgeable and potentially change their behavior if they don't need to be taking out as much in student loan debt, or at least having a grasp on that information. So I think out of everything that we've been measuring, this financial stress construct is probably the most important when it comes to student success. In terms of financial knowledge and financial behavior being linked to student success outcomes, this financial stress is the one that is really strongly linked. And we can see some pretty high proportion of students who are saying that they agree or strongly agree that they're stressed out about their personal finances. So it's close to 70% regardless of the institution, 70% or over. So that's a concern for us. When we break down that general financial stress question into the indicators of financial stress, we see that students at community colleges are more worried about having enough money to pay for school versus students at the 4-year public and private schools. They're more worried about having enough money to participate in the activities that they enjoy or the same activities as their peers. So we know that we have different needs across institutions. So, as I said, financial stress, more so than knowledge or behavior, is strongly linked to student success. And so there's a fair body of literature that exists that links the idea that students with high stress levels are more likely to have difficulty with student success outcomes. Lower GPAs, they doubt their ability to complete college, they are contemplating dropping out, they do drop out. And this literature, as well as the general stress literature, has linked financial stress with physical and mental health outcomes. And there's a pretty strong literature there as well. If you look to the left of the, my left, but if you look at the bar charts, what we've done here has, we've clustered student borrowers among high-stress student borrowers and no-stress student borrowers, and we looked at some student success measures. And you can see that the red bar are those highly stressed borrowers who are feeling like the amount of money that they owe has disrupted has disrupted them academically. So they've it's the amount of money that they've owed has caused them to neglect their academic studies. They've reduced their class load. They've considered stopping or dropping out. So that is this link between financial stress and student success is a real concern. So we know that students are, they're stressed, they are scoring low on financial knowledge, they don't know whether they have a student loan, and they don't know how much they owe. So it's important for us to think about initiatives, right? When we look at campuses who do provide financial education interventions, students on those campuses are typically more savvy when it comes to money management. They're more knowledgeable in terms of investing, identity theft, and financial aid. They're also less likely to borrow the maximum amount of student loans compared to students that are not on campuses with initiatives. So this is a good argument for initiatives. So I want to talk real quickly about what we're doing in Iowa, and I've couched it in sort of this circle of embedded. I've embedded the student in the center of this target, and then as we address the student face-to-face and directly, and then as the policies get out a little bit bigger. At Iowa State, we have, in our Department of Human Development and Family Studies, we do have a major in financial counseling and planning. So we train financial counselors and financial planners, and as part of that curriculum, we have some general education classes that we offer to the rest of the students at Iowa State. So we have a 1 and a 3 credit class. I teach the one credit online class. It's an 8-week and a 16-week course. It's a pass-fail class. I have about 400 students right now, and we offer it throughout the year. So we touch a lot of students that way. The business school has an honors course in money management, which they offer, I believe, once a year. About 3 years ago, we had the Student Loan Education Office that was created. And out of that office, there's advising and counseling. That they have walk-in hours. They have online and print financial literacy materials. They also conduct budgeting workshops and workshops on different personal finance topics. And then there's also, they table orientation to try and reach parents and students. We also have SciGold, which I don't have listed here, but that's a student group that is a peer education group that has started through a student that was in student government who felt passionate about it. As we move out, if you think about your campus, you can think about there's offices on campus that may impact indirectly the financial life of students on your campus. And so, for example, obviously we have an Office of Student Financial Aid. We saw that in our survey, only 4 in 10 students actually ever meet with advisors in that survey. And so students may not ever see a financial advisor, but we know that the rules and regulations and the support from the Office of Student Financial Aid does impact the financial lives of students on campus. We have a financial counseling clinic, which is one of the first in the nation. It's been around since the 1980s, and it's really our learning lab for our majors, and it doesn't fully serve students. It's more of if you visit the counseling clinic, there's the 2-way mirrors and recording devices so that students can practice counseling and planning. We have our major, and then there's things like the bursar's office, mental health counseling that goes on campus, student legal services. So those offices all touch in terms of being a referral and a way back to the Student Loan Education Office and our counseling clinic. So when I arrived at Iowa State 5 years ago, we were the number one in the country in terms of the amount of student loan debt. So we had the highest average. And so that really got the attention of our administrators and legislators. And so there's really kind of been a culture of debt resistance that has been created. There is mandated counseling for students who take out private student loans now. I think that was one of the initiatives that came out of that culture of debt resistance. There was also a financial literacy task force that was formed 2 years ago by the Board of Regents. There's 3 public universities in Iowa, University of Northern Iowa and University of Iowa. And so they have mandated now, as of June, they approved this idea of having a requirement in terms of financial education. So every student is mandated to have a course in financial education. Each university is going to dictate how they offer that, but there's no real stick if a student doesn't take that class. So that's something that's been at the macro level dictated. So I have meso system here, but really what this refers to is that, financial literacy on my campus and on your campus is a lot of moving parts. And just like Andrea said at George Washington, that there was an inventory done of who on campus is addressing financial literacy and how can we bring them all together. I love this idea of this working group around financial wellness, and we don't have a committee of that nature, but it's something that I think I'm going to try and convene in the spring at some point. But when all of these offices can work together, it works really well. So we have our majors serve as peer educators in the Student Loan Education Office, which was something I didn't mention, but there is a peer education team over there, a team of peer educators, and as Elizabeth mentioned, there's great resources for that in the inventory. So sharing resources and being able to be effective by working together, I think is really important. And I'll just end on, this final plug about cooperative extension as a potential resource for you. When it comes to personal finance, it's really difficult to find an entity that's non-commercial and that's non-biased, because a lot of times it's, there's fiduciary, relationships that are happening. And so we're credible, we're trustworthy, we're evidence-informed in terms of the outreach that we do, and we have really high-quality educators. And so I have the link here to your state contact, and I'm available after the presentation to talk more if you're interested. So I thank you for your time.
Okay, we have some time for questions, and I wrote down a couple of notes, and the early morning session today, the word burden sort of came up a lot, right, about the burden, and certainly not discounting the administrative responsibilities that financial aid offices have. I like to think of financial literacy as an opportunity, and so we're here to hopefully give you some resources that you can share throughout your school, and you can get others to help in this cause, not to say this is just something else for you to do. I think hopefully we've shared I gave you the financial literacy guidance. We heard about potentially personal finance courses that might be taught at your school. The individual that came up with that curriculum, I heard someone refer to her as the LeBron James of financial literacy, so she's pretty talented and she's been doing this for many years. So it's a great free curriculum that you could share with people in your campus, and Suzanne just shared some great resources. So we'd love to take some questions if you want to come up to the microphone, or we're happy to have a one-on-one conversation. I know it's kind of late in the day and you might be tired, so why don't you all just feel free to come up and talk to us and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much.